Hello everyone, my name's Josephine and I'm super excited to share with you my very first project for the Viva Las Vegas design team. I decided to create an art journal page. I love art journaling. It's one of my favorite things to do besides everything else messy. And I wanted to use some of my favorite Viva Las Vegas stamps, and I totally love the tarot cards, so that's why I wanted to use one of those. So I'm using the Dina Wakley art journal. It's the smaller one of the two that have the different papers and stuff in it. And I'm using an Aladdin spray that I just received recently, so I was super excited to try that out. And while the spray is still wet on the page, I'm adding some infusions on top of it to add a little bit more color. Those infusions are basically water-soluble powders, and they are not just like one color, but they come, like when they start dissolving, they pop up in different colors. And then I added just a little bit more water on top, in general, just a little bit more fluid to help those powders along with dissolving and moving around and getting all sorts of fancy and really nice and textured on that art journal page. As you saw, I also added some splatters, and then I just have to heat set it. That takes a little bit. But once it's dry, you can see that it really nicely blended into the ink spray and added like a nice orangey with some extra colors on top of it. So to add a little bit more texture in it, I'm just using some regular white acrylic paint and spreading that randomly with my palette knife. And again, just randomly. And what I liked about the powders, they still picked up, or the white paint picked up a little bit of the powders, so it was not a stark white, but really a little bit, I don't know, blend it more into the background if you want. So next up, I'm using the dot stamps for some more texture in the background, and I didn't want it to stand out too much, so I decided to pick some of the archival inks in yellow and orange. I list them all down below so you can find what exact colors I was using, and add them to the background. So I just wanted to have a little bit of interest that doesn't stand out too much, but if you look a little bit more closely on the page, you can see that there's something going on. That's how I love it the most. And I did the same with the row of chevrons. And then later I also added the squiggly line, stitched line as well on top of it. And I mixed it up with the yellow and the orange. I really wanted to have like those different colors for all of the different stamps in the background. And I kept it in that backwards L shape because I kind of had an image in my head, or like not an image, but a structure in my head. And the nice thing was that the spray that I sprayed originally kind of worked out with the layout that I wanted to go for, because I didn't want to cover the entire page. I want to challenge myself a little bit for white space, which, yeah, as you see, it worked out. Anyway, while the ink and some of the stuff on the page was still slightly wet, I'm just adding a little bit of Emerald Creek embossing powder on top of it, and then I'm fighting a little bit with a coffee filter so it spreads out nicely so I can catch up all the excess embossing powder, and just add it on top of the page to create structure now. So not just texture, but like dimension essentially to the page. And I'm using, again, like an earth tone more from the embossing powder because the background colors already have that earth tone to it. And that embossing powder just stayed put on some of the still wet areas of the page. And then I had enough embossing powder in certain areas that I could heat it up again and then just sprinkle some more embossing powder on top of it. And because it was hot and with that sticky, all the loose quote-unquote embossing powder kept sticking to it, so I could add more and more and more and spread out other colors. And I'm using a more turquoise green color because I wanted to add a contrast color to the orange. And if you have your color wheel in mind, orange and turquoise or bluish turquoise are contrasting colors, so they always look great to the eye. It's just kind of one of those natural things. And because I used an embossing powder that is opaque, I didn't need to worry about the orange shining through and creating kind of a weird brown color. That didn't happen here in this case. All right, I was kind of done with my background. So next up, I'm grabbing the Squiggly Star, and I'm stamping that in a brown archival ink to the top right, bottom right of my page. because I want this to stand out more, but I didn't use black because I didn't want to stand out entirely. It's not my focal point, but it was important because, as you will see a little bit, the star is one of the shapes that I wanted to add to it. I'm adding a few marks, just random, nothing really exciting, just outlining the star a little bit more. And by the way, what I liked is that it kind of set itself apart behind the white, or that it didn't stamp really on the white areas that I added before, but kind of disappeared in the background. That was by accident, not on purpose. So then I'm grabbing the Sun Tarot card, and as you see, you just briefly saw how I store my red rubber stamps in those little sleeves. I just recently changed to that system and I'm loving it. So I'm picking the Sun Tarot card, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right in English. That's kind of my German background here, so forgive me if I'm pronouncing that word wrong. But here I'm stamping it in black because I want, this is my focal point, right? So I want it really to stand out and make sure that it's nice and crisp and deep and dark and black. I'm cutting it to size, and then I'm distressing the paper borders. Well, I'm just crunching it up in general a little bit. So distressing the paper borders, bending it, squishing it, just making sure in general that this paper is really nice and used. And then I'm inking it up. First I was thinking I wanted to use the contrast colors like a blue turquoise again, but then I decided no, I actually want to add more layers in between, so I will use the same color that I used for the background for this one, and then add contrasting colors in between. Plus it's the sun, so it kind of had to be yellow and orange. That made sense, at least in my head it did. So here we go, same colors. I'm starting with the same ink spray. I'm using very similar. I didn't use the brown infusions ink, but I'm using the same orange and yellow ones to add to that part. And then because this is just normal paper, I really had to let it sit for a while. The heat setting does it. I'm impatient. I love to heat set everything. But because it was not watercolor paper that I was using, but just normal cardstock, I added so much fluid to it that I just had to leave it alone and let it sit to really dry. And I actually did that overnight. So, but that pretty much is what I did here for the sun, all grunged up, all distressed side. I made sure that the ink goes into all of the areas. And then I'm adding a little bit more vintage flair to it if you want, using some brown distress oxide and just smooshing that into the distressed sides. And what it does is, because the paper is all roughed up, it really seeps into the softness of the paper and kind of soaks in, and it just creates a really nice effect. It's kind of subtle, but I just love it, and I do it all the time when I distress paper. And then I had some ink left, but not enough, as you can see, because I had to add a little bit more to my craft mat to add some of those brown splatters, again, just to repeat the color. I mean, I kind of had a brown in the background, but I just wanted to repeat that same vintage look for the background. And then I'm setting that aside again to let it dry. As you see, nothing gets wasted. Well, a little bit. Because I'm cleaning this up now. But in general, yeah, I love to repeat colors. So that's what I was just doing here. All right, again, letting it dry, letting the little tarot card, the sun card dry, and then the next day I'm coming back and now I'm adding the contrasting color to it. So I'm picking some old book paper, some old music sheet, some of it are already ripped apart in little strips. Again, I wanted to keep that L shape I wanted to keep that L shape. So I ripped apart like longer pieces for the long side of the book and shorter pieces for the short side of the book. I hope that makes sense what I'm doing. And then I sprayed some blue and turquoise colors all over the paper. And I'm really saturating them with the sprays. I'm using Lindy's and Distress Oxides for that. I'm really saturating them, and as you can see, there's a lot of leftover paint again on my little craft mat scrap piece here. So what I then end up doing is that I use the bigger pieces of the excess paper that I had laying to the side and dip that in there. And this way I kind of got a more natural distress look, if you will. And I actually like those pieces a lot better. So once everything was dry again, I then decided to rip a few more pieces from the former bigger parts to create like this more distressed look. So I have really blue pieces of color, and then I have distressed blue pieces of color. Again, I'm sorry, I hope this makes sense. And then I'm just picking the pieces that I like the most and kind of align those how I think it looks best. And then I'm just adhering them with gel medium. So if you have ever worked with distress inks or distress oxides, you know that they are not permanent, that you can reactivate them when you go over them with something wet. I totally forgot. I know that, of course, for the ink pads, but I didn't think about it that the spray would do the exact same thing. I haven't used the oxide sprays too much before. So you can see that the blue from the paper starts spreading onto my art journal page and actually colors my brush and the gel medium. And I was kind of sitting there like, shh, that's not what I wanted. So I tried to kind of dab it away with my kitchen towel, but then I realized it actually looks really nice because now the paper looks like it blended into the background. So it gives like a more natural look and doesn't stand like too weirdly apart. Anyway, it was a lucky mistake. I really liked how it turned out. So, and then I found this weird piece of, I don't even know really what it is, but it is a weird texture. I found that in my scrap drawer and I thought, perfect color, awesome, I'll just add it to it. So before all the medium was actually drying, I just added that to the side and underneath the tarot card. That one I adhered as well with gel medium, and now I'm taking that resin star that I just recently created using just a mold and some resin, and the top is colored with, I think it's called Pearlex mica powder or something, and just adhere everything. So as a final step, I'm taking one of those chipboard sentiments. I'm ripping away some of the chipboard because they're actually way too thick in my opinion. So I'm always taking a few layers off to make it a bit thinner. And then I'm just distressing it with the same archival inks that I used for the background for the stamps and adhere that on top of my art journal page. So, and that's essentially where we are after everything is adhered, after everything is dry, because that gel medium needed a little bit to dry. I was really happy with the contrast of the turquoise with the orange and how everything came together. I really love the 3D resin star. I think I have to do more with 3D art. I love how it turned out. I love how the tarot card looks on top of my art journal page, and in general all the stems, how everything came together. So I hope you enjoyed my very first video for the Viva Las Vegas design team. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you're not a subscriber already, and then I hope I'll see you soon with another video. Bye!